I, David, I thought you introduced me when you called on you talked about SpongeBob. I am not SpongeBob. I'm Bob Edgar. I'm General Secretary of the National Council of Churches and soon to be president of of Common Cause, which is a national organization looking at good government issues. Let me just say something before I read a statement. I spent 12 years as a member of Congress. I spent more years as a pastor. And I have to say that part of the challenge is that many of the pastors I work with have been trained in how to preach a sermon, and they've been trained in trying to share the whole truth, and their answers are often 10, 15, 20-minute answers. And we have not seriously invaded our seminaries to train ministers and laypersons on some of the techniques of how to get a voice out, how to speak clearly in the media. And we're not as susceptible to sloganeering. Also, as I detail in the book I wrote called Middle Church, and the subtitle is equally important because it's reclaiming the moral values of the faithful majority from the religious right. And the point I make in my book is if you put the radical religious right on that wall and the radical religious left on that wall, there are two blocks that are rarely talked about. One is an emerging block of modern evangelicals who have read the Bible literally enough to discover God cares about poor people, God cares about the environment, and they have been leaders, spokespersons like Rick Cizik talking about global warming, and Jim Wallace and Ron Sider talking about the issues of poverty. There are also moderate progressives who aren't often seen in the media, who have come to say, let's end the poverty that kills, let's heal the planet. And then there is another block, that's the genetically nice group in what I call middle church, middle synagogue, middle mosque. And they're still trying to emerge and get their voice out in the public. I've long felt that the media has given Americans a distorted view of what people of faith believe, and the research of Media Matters proves that. I know that news judgment is often affected by harshness of rhetoric and the degree of conflict and scandal involved. But the vast majority of Americans of faith, many faith groups, are engaged in none of these, and thus won't appear in the media unless enterprising reporters and editors balance their coverage with what the majority of faithful Americans are in fact saying and doing. Here are two examples that I think illustrate the points that we've been making. Now keep in mind, there are 10,000 accredited journalists in Washington, D.C. Two events in Washington that attracted about the same number of participants. One brings 3,000 people from across the nation to the Washington National Cathedral last March, marking the Iraq War anniversary. Some of the most compelling stories and sermons are preached at the National Cathedral. Virtually no national media covered the event as we walked from the National Cathedral to the White House, and 200 of us ceremonially were arrested in an act of civil disobedience, praying and singing at the White House. Virtually no coverage. The second was held last year here in Washington in a hotel ballroom, where one extreme Christian fundamentalist, John Hagee, talks about supporting the war and Israel so the second coming can take place. That event gets front page coverage in the Wall Street Journal and several national media outlets. Most Christians do not believe what these so-called Christian Zionists believe, but you would not know that if your only source of information were the major media. So I ask you, the media, the members of the journalistic press here in Washington, where were you the night that 3,000 Christians renewed their protest of this unjust, immoral war? Where were you when virtually every major Christian religious leader in this country opposed the war before the invasion? Where were you when 13 of us went to Baghdad in January of 2002? Where were you when a majority of Christian leaders in this country called the Bush administration's budget incompatible with biblical understanding of helping the poor? And where were you when 1,000 people came to Washington for ecumenical advocacy days this last March and ended their weekend on Capitol Hill advocating for the poorest of Americans? Where were you last January when a broad coalition of nearly 40 Christian leaders called on President Bush to make Israel and Palestine peacemaking an urgent priority of his administration? Christianity may be monotheistic, but it is not monolithic. Christians have disagreed with one another about many things since Jesus walked on this planet. If you are interested in numbers, in the majority of Christians and what they are doing, then you are missing that story. If you're only interested in outrageous, bombastic demagoguery, then you have succeeded in reporting the story you wanted to tell. I found on my book tour last year, in city after city, people were tired of hearing only one point of view from religious leaders they were hearing in the media. I might say parenthetically, when I visited with the president of Syria, he said when some of the radical religious right speak in the United States, they make headlines. Where is the voice of the rest of the religious community? I came back from that experience and said the National Council of Churches would respond within 10 seconds when some outrageous statement was made by the radical religious right, because the vast majority, faithful majority of Christians, Jews, and Muslims don't hold those views. And we've taken the time to actually invade Syria and Jordan and Egypt with a balanced point of view. We need to do more, but it just points out some of the job that we have to do. I hope both the print and electronic media in this country will now seek the balance so many of them profess to have as they continue to report issues of religion and the impact on our society, government, and American culture. One final word. As I said in the beginning, we need to go to our seminaries, to our universities and colleges, and to our journalism schools and do a better job of teaching all of us to be faithful in reporting on the faithful majority's words so that that balanced approach is heard both here in the United States and around the world. Thank you for your time. I now want to introduce Alexia Kelly. That's Kelley. And Alexia, you're our final speaker.